Hello everyone, my name is Meeky Hwang and I'm from Endeavor, and I'll be talking about optimized SEO with serverless sitemaps. So before we start, I just wanted to give a quick intro on my company and myself. I'm from Endeavor, and we've been around since 2015, and we're 100% distributed, and we are a technology consulting company, or a technology agency if you want to call that. And if you want to find a little more about the company, you can go to our website, endeavor.io, or our LinkedIn profile, linkedin.com/endeavor. Here are some of our featured clients and partners. And a little bit about me. I'm a CTO and a founding partner and a technical architect at Endeavor. And I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Systems of Information Engineering from University of Virginia, MFA in 3D Animation and School of Visual Arts. And I have over 19 years of building websites in various languages. And since we're focused on the WordPress track, some of my WordPress experience is I have contributed to WordPress core and plugins before. And I have experience with the WordPress.com VIP development as well. And you can go to my LinkedIn to read more about me if you're curious. All right, going to our talk. What we're going to be talking about here is I'll talk about some of the WordPress sitemaps plugins mostly, because that's probably the most common way to get the sitemaps implemented on your websites and WordPress websites, and some of the limitations and issues we ran into using these plugins. And some alternatives we tried out, and before we move on to serverless, and we're going to move on to quick intro to AWS serverless, and then the example that we tried out, and then how we implemented our serverless sitemap, and some of the next steps that we have in our queue. What I won't be really focusing on is details around AWS Lambda, DynamoDB, CloudWatch, or API Gateway. I use these terms just because we used it in our implementation, but I'm not going to go into too much details around that. And I'm just assuming that people are familiar with these terms. You don't have to know too much about it, and you don't need to be an expert on it, but then I'll be using these terms. So if you don't know them, it's going to be a little difficult to follow. I won't go too much into details about WordPress development. I'll be sharing some codes. So I'm also assuming that people here are developers. And so if you don't know this, it's probably going to be difficult to follow along because there's going to be a lot of coding here. So same thing with the PHP development, because WordPress is on PHP and AppStack. So I'm assuming that you're familiar with it. And Node.js development for Lambda functions, I'm using Node.js. So if you don't know JavaScript or Node, it might be a little difficult to kind of follow along what the code is actually really saying. And I won't really go into too much details on the sitemap specifications because Google has a pretty good documents on it, and I actually linked it on the later slides. You can go there directly to kind of find out the requirements and limitations and the individual limits on the files and things like that on their website. So WordPress sitemaps, like I said before, most of the times that if you're trying to put a XML sitemap on your WordPress sites, you're probably going to be using one of these community plugins. And these are the ones, there are more than these for the popular plugins, but these are the ones that we actually tried out on our site. So all-in-one SEO pack, Google XML sitemap, simple sitemap, WordPress SEO by Yoast, better WordPress Google XML sitemaps. They're pretty good for a smaller WordPress sites, and then the sites without like a crazy content or different custom content types, they do a pretty good job on the basics of it. But the client that we were actually putting this on was an enterprise level media company, so they have a lot of content, and like a lot of content meaning for like articles, they have over 75,000 articles. And a lot of articles have rich media contents, like a lot of images and a lot of video content, and they want to promote their contents through those media contents. So these these plugins actually has some limitations, and we're running into a bunch of issues using the community plugins. So the limitations we actually ran into is that the most of these plugins actually, when you call the sitemap, they query the contents and do any sanitization on the fly. So if you call the sitemap, it's actually trying to run all that process, which is very heavy job for the size of the content that we're dealing with. So a lot of times it will just pretty much time out, and then it won't really show anything on the screen when you call the XML file. So it'll just like get a lot of white screens. So you have to do a lot of different ways to kind of finagle things. And also the site was very customized. So since it was an enterprise level media company, they wanted to do a lot of cool things or different things that's not us out of the box WordPress. So we have a lot of custom content types. We have different types of media embeds, and we're not necessarily always using the featured image. So like the images are embedded in different ways. We have a lot of different custom fields. And then we also have a lot of custom taxonomies. So, and we don't necessarily use the default custom types or taxonomies. So a lot of these plugins actually kind of assumes that we're using the pages and posts, but then we're really using it too much. So we also needed a way to remove those. And a lot of these plugins we noticed was that they don't really clean up the old URLs. So if you change the URL slugs, so if you actually change the URL, all the old URLs doesn't get cleaned up and they get orphaned and they just kind of linger in the sitemap, which isn't really good for your SEO. And I think all the plugins that we actually tried out didn't have any, none of them actually had a video sitemap, and video sitemap is relatively new, and it's also not really needed if you don't have too much video content. So they didn't really have it. So in order for us to include it, it's actually a customization. And a lot of the plugins also ran into caching issues because we're on the managed hosting. So there's only certain we're not really open to write everything write anything to any of the directories. So like that was another issue that we ran into. And use sitemap, most of these plugins actually support new sitemaps, but if you actually wanted to add the new sitemap, it was actually like an add-on and you have to pay more. And a lot of times that was the case. So what did we try out? So initially, well, obviously we're on the LAMP stack, so in the WordPress land. So we're trying to actually achieve this within the LAMP stack land. So we pretty much customized a lot of but we picked one plugin that was actually pretty close to what we wanted, and we started customizing the heck out of it. So the plugin we picked was the Better WordPress Google XML sitemap. It was very robust actually, so you could do a lot from just kind of like tweaking the admin interface because it had a lot of options and you have different ways to change things around, and then it supports custom post type and taxonomy and all that. But the issue we ran into with this was that this plugin was 4 years old, so they only supported up to WordPress version 3.6, and we're now at 5.4.1, I think. So it was very outdated, and then even the sitemap requirements have changed over the years. They have different limitations and different things, and they allow different things as well. And most importantly, they weren't really including the video sitemap either. So to do that, we have to do a lot of customization from there. And any customization that goes with the community plugin that we started to actually maintain this plugin since we customized it now. And we actually set up a bunch of different custom CLI or WP CLI commands to try to generate the sitemaps offline, because that was the most heavy lifting the job that we had to deal with. And we tried different ways to do it, like a schedule job and generate the sitemap on the background offline. And we try to kind of like chunk the XML files into smaller files so that it will actually kind of run faster. And we ended up actually getting the XML files to 1,000 URLs per XML files. And then I think the current limit now is that it's like 50,000 URLs, but we kind of wanted to get to a certain point that it's actually bigger than that. So we still had some issues just staying in the LAMP stack. So we kind of try to see outside of that. So to do that, we just wanted to see what do we really want for our sitemaps. So this is pretty much like the kind of requirements for our phase 1. So we want the basic XML for the site, XML sitemaps for the site. And we also want to make sure that we promote the rich media contents with the image sitemap and then video sitemaps. And we want to make sure that we reduce the amount of XML files that we generate and increase the size of each sitemap files. And we also want to make sure when the contents are updated, the sitemaps are updated as well. And also we want to make sure we can access the sitemap without getting timed out. And also want to make sure that we actually ping the search engines when the sitemaps are generated. So the Google, now the requirements for the sitemap is like you can actually put up to 50,000 URLs or 50 megabytes per the XML files, or I think GZIP as well. But our goal, we didn't want to go there right away, but our goal was to just get at least like 10,000 URLs per XML files. So that's actually a big increase from 1,000 URLs, because if we have 1,000 URLs and we had about over 75,000 articles, that's a lot of XML files. So we want to kind of to make sure that we actually reduce the amount of it. So to do this, we just realized that we don't have to do everything in the WordPress LAMP stack. So we kind of try to look outside of the box, and that's where we actually try to test out the serverless part. So what is serverless? Serverless is the native architecture of the cloud that enables you to shift more of your operation responsibilities to AWS, increasing your agility and innovation. You can read this, so I don't really have to read it for you. But if you want to find out more about the serverless, you can go to their website, aws.amazon.com and serverless, since we use the AWS serverless using Lambda. So you can go there to read about it. But pretty much it will actually, we wanted the solution that you don't have to spin up the entire server to kind of and then maintain it separately. We just wanted like a simple version, it just does the sitemap generation job. So we decided to do the serverless approach for our sitemap. So our first version. So we'll actually pretty much wanted to just spin up the Lambda function, put the generated XML files to S3 bucket, and then just access it there. To do that, we'll have to create the Lambda function for generating the sitemap. So our initial version that we actually, so this is pretty much the generating Lambda function in Node.js. We started from, well, it's a beauty of open source that you don't have to start from scratch. So we looked for the existing one first, and then we found the Frank Adrian's Lambda sitemap generator repo, the code base, and then it was doing a lot of the things that we wanted to do. So we started from there. And I actually linked it at the end of the slide, so you can actually go there to see it if you want to check that out. And a little shout out for that too. So what we do pretty much is that we'll actually get the data, which is the items that we call. This is mostly all the articles, and we'll actually get it directly initially from the MySQL from the WordPress side, and we'll chunk it by 10,000 items, which is 10,000 URLs was the goal to kind of get to, and we'll pretty much put it into the format that the sitemap library actually wanted, and then we'll put it into that format, and we will upload it to S3 bucket. So some of the issues that we actually hit from the initial, that first version that we had, is that we still have the same performance issues as the WordPress plugin, because we're actually pretty much querying everything from the WordPress MySQL database anyway, and we're just trying to directly hit it from the Lambda function. And we're, like I said before, we're on the managed hosting, so if it's a heavy job, it will actually time out for us. So like it was actually having different issues to try to do that. So we identified the bottleneck was actually trying to get the data from the bicycle directly. So we actually tried to put that job separate out that job. So we'll actually do the querying and then put that data into the JSON and then put it into S3. And then we'll, from that data JSON file, which was pretty much queried out, and we'll start the sitemap generation from there. So we'll do that, and we'll also make sure that we actually identify the images, and then make sure that if the articles actually have videos, we'll actually put the IDs. And our initial thought was that we'll actually do the sanitization of the video data from the generating the sitemap side, because it's pretty much calling. So our videos are mostly Brightcove. The videos that we are actually interested in promoting was all Brightcove, so we just needed to hit the Brightcove API. But initially, we're actually trying to do that on the generating the sitemap portion. But initially, the data that we actually kind of cleaned up before we actually run all this generating sitemap lambda, calling the generating sitemap lambda functions, that data structure look like this. So we have the URLs for the images and the Brightcove ID, just like, so we're exporting that part only. But we realized that calling the Brightcove API was a little bit annoying. Well, it might be my personal opinion, but just to get the token was actually annoying. And then we did it. Well, it was trying to do that on the Lambda was actually a little more challenging than we wanted to be. So we just realized that we already have this all set up in the WordPress and PHP stack. So why don't we just do that before we export it? So just like have everything cleaned up before we export it, because we already have it on the PHP, because we're using the Brightcove players on the site anyway. So we actually decided to do all that in the LAMP stack first. So on the WordPress side, when before we actually export the data to the S3 bucket, we'll actually do the querying part and then sanitization part, including the video and images. Images just kind of pretty much going through the contents and kind of the regex, and then pulling out the necessary information for the images, embed images, and then we'll actually put it to S3 bucket, and then we'll use that file, export it, cleaned up file to start the sitemap generation. So the data structure looked like this on that version. So you actually see that images actually have information that for the caption and location, which is the mandatory, not the mandatory, necessary information for the image sitemap, and then video actually is in the structure. So this looks pretty close to the required fields are all there for the sitemap, but just in JSON format, not in XML format. So it was pretty much ready to just kind of pull it from the Lambda function and display it. And since we have more than one sitemap, we just also need to create the sitemap index. So it pretty much does the sitemap index on the creating sitemap Lambda function. It will actually do that at the end. So once we generated everything, the S3 bucket will have all the sitemaps that we needed. So now that we actually grouped it by 10,000 URLs, we only have 8 instead of 75. And then the index sitemap. So some of the sample sitemaps, it looks like this. So the sitemap actually includes the video sitemaps here, and then the image sitemaps. We didn't separate it out, the video sitemaps or image sitemaps, because well, Google doesn't really care if you actually pull it out separately or just embed it into your main ones. So we just decided to do the main ones since we're actually trying to export it all together. There's no need for us to redo it for the video sitemap. So, but it's your preference. I don't think Google really cares anymore either way. So we just kind of decided to include it in here. And our index sitemap looked like that. So from initial the requirements per se, so we were able to achieve that. We generate the basic sitemaps, and we were able to have images and video sitemaps. And also we were able to reduce the amount and increase the size of each sitemap files. So we still need these other 3 points that we wanted to make sure that we actually get it done. So to do that, so we wanted to, so if we need to update the contents, let's go back to, oh, sorry. So if we need to, oh, sorry. So if you need to make sure that the contents, the sitemaps are updated when the contents are updated, we decided to, instead of just exporting the file into a JSON file, then like if you want to change anything, then you pretty much had to rerun the whole thing. So why don't we just use the DynamoDB? So like when individual item is updated, we can just update those and we call the sitemap generation from the DynamoDB directly. So to do that, we actually created an API endpoint to do the export, import to the DynamoDB. So we ended up with these endpoints. So create, it's importing one per articles per item, and then just import to just run the bulk import and update. So if there's an update, we'll just have a updated individual item, and delete if the content gets deleted, it'll actually call that to delete it from the DynamoDB. These last 2 were just for the debugging purpose, so just to get which item or list all the items. So we wanted to just see what's in there, but it wasn't really used for the import portion. So I'll just show the example through the create endpoints. Pretty much like I saw before that we're already kind of cleaned up the data already, so it's kind of in a format that we want it to be. So all we were doing was just literally putting it to the DynamoDB. So now that our workflow changed a little, so instead of having the, it's like instead of actually having the JSON exported file, we're actually putting it into the DynamoDB. So that brings to, so to kind of explain that the WordPress plugin that we needed to have to kind of like talk to the AWS land. So we wanted to, the plugin was actually pretty much doing the custom WP CLI to do the one-time bulk import or any partial imports. And we try to kind of do the heavy lifting process on the import process, so that by the time it's on this section, it's pretty much all cleaned up, and all you have to just do is call it and export it to the XML file. And we also need to make sure that it actually propagates the content updates when the content changes. And we needed to retrieve the sitemap from the S3 bucket and also update the robots.txt file to kind of ping the search engines. So some example on the WP CLI is that this pretty much does the bulk import as well as the partial imports. So I think, so this part was mostly, it's kind of like a partial import of bulk imports. So you have different options to actually do it. So you have you can kind of flag it to update, and or you can specify which content type you specifically want to do, or set up the limits, and then where it offsets where you actually want to start. And pretty much you're calling the import data, which we'll look at it in a later section, later slides. And it pretty much gives you the time that it took to run it. And this is for if you're just running the bulk import. So it'll actually look through, get stats. It's the one that actually calls and queries how many how many items you have in your database for whatever type that you're trying to look at. So we'll actually part it by the limit that you're passing in, and it will run through all the parts, and then try to run the import data. And just, yeah, so that will actually, and it also give you the progress bar of like your process on that case. So if you run it like the partial, it will actually tell you like how many out of total was succeeded from your chunk. And if you actually run the entire thing without passing any parameters, it will just go through everything. I just kind of deleted the middle part because it was getting too big. But yeah, I'll tell you like how long it took as well. The import data function that you kind of saw that in the previous code base that it was actually calling it a lot. So we wanted to make sure this is pretty much doing the same thing in different way, different variations. So it's we just kind of want to make sure that it's in a reusable function. So if you don't really set up send the types, it will actually kind of give you the default one. So for this, I think testing phase that when I snapshot this code is we're just only interested in articles and feature content types. So we'll just run through everything. If not, it'll just kind of make sure that it's only going to do the specific type that you actually get. And get data will query the database and then just kind of put all the articles and features that you have. And then it will import it. We'll look at this function in a little bit. And then gives you an error if it didn't succeed. Oops, sorry. So the import post will actually sanitize that post, which we'll look at it in the next slide, and then put it into JSON format, and then calls the API endpoints, and then just put it there. So this was the regular update create endpoint, and this was more with the post update endpoints. And sanitization was pretty much for the regular ones too, but for images and videos, because images we're pretty much doing the regex to make sure that we're pulling all the images on the contents. And for videos, it will call the Brightcove API and then and put it into the format that we want. So it's example, because since we already used the Brightcove, we already used Brightcove in the site, that all these libraries that we wanted or needed is already there. So we're just pretty much requiring and reusing those functions. So we'll call their Brightcove API and then put the necessary information that we need for the video sitemap into the format that we want. So how do we actually tell DynamoDB the contents are updated? We'll have like different hooks on the content updates, and then we'll actually call the individual APIs, the delete, update, or create APIs. So on save post, if it's a new and published, then we'll actually just call the create endpoint. But if it's an update, which is one of the parameters that gets passed out on the save post, well, it's a re-import, and it's going to call the updated endpoints instead. And on trashing the post or deleting it, it'll actually delete, and it will call the deleted endpoints. So through that, we were able to achieve that when the content is updated, the sitemap is updated. So that when sitemap is updated pretty much, because it's going to be updated on the DynamoDB that we are generating the sitemap from. Retrieving the sitemap. So we went to the standard way of how WordPress actually retrieves the contents or generate the content, or however you want to call it. So we will create a rewrite rule to make sure that sitemap URL that we're passing will be doing what we want it to do. To do that, we have to have a query bar with a custom query bar to make sure that it actually is sending the right information and parse the request. And also robots.txt was to update the robots.txt. So there are filters and actions that we put in to do that. So like I said, the query bar, we register the ls module as a custom query bar. And if that query bar is there, we want to make sure that we're loading the sitemap instead of doing other things. We're going to different templates. And we also added the rewrite rules so that all the XML URLs were done passing our custom query bar so that we can intercept it instead of going to the index.php. And also on the robots.txt, we're updating our index URL to that. And to the load sitemap, we're actually making sure that we're loading it from the S3. And to load it, we actually have to stream it because to actually display it on the site if you're calling it. But we realized that, do we really need this? It's really overkill to do all that just to grab the XML file that's in the S3 bucket. So we decided to not do that and call the S3 bucket URL directly. So to do that, we just need to make sure that we update the sitemap index to look at the S3 bucket URL directly. But to do that, we have to make sure that the files are public. And then when we are generating the sitemaps, we're just pinging the search engines directly. So it all came down to that from that mess. So with that, we were able to accomplish all the items that we wanted to accomplish initially. So we have the basic XML files for the sitemaps, and then we have videos and images sitemaps. Now we have the smaller amount of XML files, and we were able to update the XML files, the sitemap files when the contents are updated, and then sitemaps are available without timing out because it's just calling directly to S3, so it's there. We don't have a timing out issue anymore, and search engines are pinged when the sitemaps are generated. So the next steps that we wanted to add on is the Amazon Q service for the bulk import, because the import part is the most heavy lifting now, so that sometimes it still takes a while when you're trying to query and send it. It's more the sanitization part that's actually taking a little longer. So we want to make sure that if it stops, we want it to continue without failing. So we wanted to make sure that we can actually do that with implementing the Q service. And also all need to make sure that on the WordPress end, we can kind of control different things by having an admin interface. So like kind of like a different limits you can send or offset or anything, or even a button to actually generate the sitemaps, and also create a schedule job to auto generate, so it kind of cleans up on its own, other than the hooks for the individual items, and use sitemaps that we didn't include it in here, but then something that we also wanted to have. And some of the items that we have, but it's not really noteworthy yet. With that, some of the useful links, the Google sitemap link that I promised from before. So this actually has a pretty good documentations on how to generate the sitemap or video sitemaps or news sitemaps or image sitemaps, and then the limits, and then what you need to do to ping the search engines. Serverless.com for our AWS development stack, we actually use serverless, so that so if you want to actually check that out, it's pretty useful to kind of like get it quickly done. And some documentations on the AWS serverless, and the GitHub repo we actually started our whole Lambda function from. Okay, that kind of wraps it up. So I know that I'll open up to the question a little quickly, but if you don't get a chance to ask what you want to ask, feel free to reach out to contact@endeavor.io, and that's my company website, and also on our Twitter and LinkedIn and slides. I didn't put it up yet, but then once I put it up in the public space, I will share that with you guys. All right, thank you. And I think that wraps up my presentation. How do I open it?
A comment from Gretchen in the questions window, Meeky, and I'm going to unmute the audience so that they can really talk and ask questions verbally too. All right, audience members, if you want to comment or say anything, you should be able to unmute yourselves at this point. Gretchen pointed out, as a pro tip,
this was actually
just be careful.
Yeah.
Yep. Looks like she's getting over possibly a cold. Thank you, Meeky. Any questions? All right.
Quiet crowd.
Thanks for joining,
is-
everyone.
How is your SEO doing with this serverless sitemaps? Did you notice a change in how the search engines are treating you, or the kind of traffic that you're getting and things like that?
Yeah, I can probably answer to that a little later once we actually really deploy this, because we're actually on hold to deploy this to prod. So I can share that probably after we actually deploy this, but it's a lot faster and it actually represents the data more accurately. So I'm thinking that it will actually be helping a lot, but that we actually don't have enough data to tell you yet.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no further questions, I guess we'll end early and give everyone a stretch break. Don't forget, there are 2 raffles today. They're about to be announced in the general channel momentarily. You can enter them on Slack through the general channel. We're using a bot for the raffle, so it's kind of cool. And obviously, if you have any questions or suggestions about holding all of this virtually, we welcome your feedback as well in the help desk section. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.